As much as she tried, she could not get him off her mind. Yet again, she pictured him as she gazed out the window. He was not tall, but not short either. His build was sort of stocky, but hard stocky, like he trained with weights in the gym and maybe did a little road work too. He was a former SEAL, after all, and SEALs stayed in shape long after their combat days were history. Or so she imagined. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, his face bearing some scruff, which made him seem all the rougher, if not, dare she say it to herself, macho. His leather coat was worn and old as the hills. His brown eyes were stunningly big pools, and they didn't look at her so much as peered directly into her very core. There was no doubt that he'd taken an instant liking to her. He was also a toucher. When she'd set her hands on the bar, he subtly touched them with his fingertips, as if to let her know he just couldn't resist her. He wasn't being overly aggressive, nor was he a groper. Far from it. He was just a toucher, a man who enjoyed showing his affection. At her age, she knew the difference between good touch and bad touch, and judging by the way his touching made her feel in her stomach and stirred things slightly south of her stomach, his touch was most definitely of the good variety. His name was Sam Savage. After his stint as a Navy SEAL, he'd become a freelance foreign correspondent, something that sounded romantic and exciting to her. War stories, Pete answered when she asked him what kind of reporting he did. I brought my expertise to the subject, and it was fun for a while, traveling all over the place to get a scoop. Dangerous, too, but it didn't pay, so in the end, I had to settle for a new job in the security industry. She sipped her beer, ran a hand through her thick, dark, shoulder-length hair, and looked into his brown eyes. Have I read anything you've written? She asked coyly. He unbuttoned more than one button on his khaki work shirt, as if things were really heating up in the airport. Ran a hand over his facial scruff, and then placed the hand gently on her shoulder. Mary, he said, if you gotta ask. He allowed the thought to trail off like that was answer enough. She thought it was a clever response, of course, and she couldn't help but laugh. As if trying to change the subject, he asked her where she was heading. Rome, Florence, and Venice, she told him. He nodded. Said he'd gone to Rome on his first honeymoon. He'd been there many times since, but he preferred Florence further north. He explained that it felt more like a small town, whereas Rome was a giant city like New York. She told him she loved Florence too, and always made a point of visiting whenever she went to Italy, which was at least once every 3 years. They looked into one another's eyes for a time that was a bit too long. It caused them both to blush. Well then, she said, drinking the rest of her beer. I suppose I should be getting to my gate. She went to leave a 20 on the bar, but he said, It's on me, Mary. She smiled warmly, and for the first time since they'd met, barely a half hour earlier, she placed her hand gently on his. That's really kind of you, Sam, she said. He grinned, dug into his pocket, came back out with a card, and handed it to her. Glancing at the card, she said, You live in New York City? I visit the city a lot for my job. My number's on there, he said. By all means, please call me when you're in town. Chuckled. After your vacation, of course. She slipped the card into her leather bag. I most definitely will, Sam, she replied. Oh, and I'll be sure to download one of your articles before we take off. Which one would you suggest I read first? He thought it over for a minute, then, I did several pieces on pirates in West and East Africa, he said. I'm pretty sure you can still get them online. Pirates? She said. Sounds scary. It was, he said. Pirates it is then, she smiled, and gathered up her bag. Say, Sam, you never said where you were heading to. He drank a swig of whiskey, set the glass back down onto the bar thoughtfully, and wiped his lips with the back of his hand. Oh, he said, here, there, and everywhere. She immediately recognized the Beatles song. She loved the Beatles. She was old enough, in fact, to remember the Beatles when they were still together, although she was barely out of kindergarten when they finally split up. You sure are a mystery man, Sam, she said, and a romantic adventurer. You are true to your calling, whatever that may be now. They looked into one another's eyes again for far longer than a couple who heartily know one another should. So long, Sam, she said, tucking her bag under her arm. Have a safe flight, Mary, he replied. She left the bar feeling a pit in her stomach. In a very good way.